All right, so let's actually get to another video, and this video is going to be like the last one. It's um, mostly theoretical stuff and revision on simply the routing or how routing works in Laravel, right? So routing in Laravel defines how incoming HTTP requests are handled by the application. This is basically what routing is. And again, routing is done in the routes folder. We have a couple. The most important ones are simply the web.php and the app.php and the api.php, which we do not have in here, because again we need to run some artisan command to actually generate it, which is related to our API endpoints. All right, so when a client sends a request to an API endpoint, which is mostly in Postman, which is actually this software here, which we'll use to test our endpoints, well, basically Laravel checks the routes file to determine which code should run. So if we hit Postman, for example, with /ABI/posts, then we're making a request to our Laravel application, which is running right now. So Postman will look for the API.php file, or actually Laravel will look for the API.php file, and it will hit this routes in here, all right? And then it's going to trigger whether it's a callback function or just the controller, all right, which simply works with this specific request or URL, right? So Laravel checks the routes file to determine which code should run in here, right? So Laravel, the request flow in Laravel, when an API request is sent, the client, which is actually our our API test tool, which is Postman, we're gonna hit a route inside. It's gonna hit the controller, and the controller can hit a model, or sometimes it will not hit a model, but almost always it will hit a model. In mostly in production applications, or in all production applications, it will hit a model, and then it will hit a response, which will probably like send data, delete data, return data, and so on. All right, so Laravel always starts by checking the route. So everything starts from the route, right? When it comes to Laravel applications, whether they are APIs or non-APIs applications. All right, so another point in here, which is API routing file. All REST API routes are defined inside, again, the routes.php here. So we have the API.php, which is, again, we do not have in here just yet, which for reasons that I just said. And any route inside this file is automatically prefixed with the /API. We've already went through that, all right? An example in here of these routes can be a route which is actually the class, and then we're going to go for the scope resolution operator, and we're going to go for the function in here, which is get, in this case, the static function, which will take in two parameters. First one is basically this route, and the second one is actually the callback function or the controller. All right, and or the controller method in here. All right, so an actual endpoint can be something like this. So something like this will represent that. So if you want to hit this route inside Postman, we're going to go for the /API first, and then / and then the route that's right in here, which is actually users. All right, the basic route structure consists of an HTTP method, which we will specify once we are inside Postman, and a URI, which is simply an endpoint. This is actually the URI. All right, so this in here can be the endpoint, can be named URL, can be named URI. They're basically the same. All right, and an action, basically an action is a callback function or a method. And mostly in production applications, and all of them actually, it's going to be a controller method. All right, a full example for an API route or endpoint can be something like this: a route get, and then /post, which is the URI, and then post controller. This is the controller right in here, and then the action or the method, which is just index. So something like this will return probably all the posts that we have inside our own database. All right, this means in here, when a GET request is sent to /API/posts, then Laravel will call the index method right in here in post controller. So it's exactly actually like the web.php routes. All right, this is what it is. We also have HTTP methods, which you're probably familiar with, like the rest, get and post and put, delete, and so on. All right. Sorry, REST APIs use specific HTTP methods, and those methods are get, post, put, or even patch. One of them is basically for updating a full resource, and the other for updating the whole resource. All right. One is for updating a part of the resource, and one is for updating the whole resource. All right. A delete in here is just basically for deleting data. All right. And they simply represent this part, right? So the method in here, which is get, simply represents, or the static method simply represents the HTTP method, all right? And we're gonna specify whether we're hitting a get or a post or a put or a delete actually inside Postman also. All right, once we work with that. If you do not understand everything in here, because I know things like a little bit theoretical, then don't worry about it, all right? We're gonna get to every part that I just explained in the next couple of videos. All right, an example can be these routes in here. All right, route post and then slash post and then store like this. So this is a route type of post. All right, we're gonna head this. In order for this to work, we need to specify inside postman that the method should be post. All right, this will insert a new post in here, right, with this store function. And the put function is actually used for updating data. So this route in here, which contains actually an ID for this post, an ID as a parameter, will hit the update function, which will just update the data. Once we work with this inside Postman, we should specify that we need to use the put method right in here. All right, we also have the delete function. The delete function will take on this route. We'll just go slash post slash ID, and this will head the destroy function inside the post controller, and this will allow us to simply destroy or delete a post by its ID. If we want to trigger this inside postman, we should go to this route or endpoint, and we should hit it with the delete HTTP method. All right, so each method in here represents a specific action. All right, to the next point, route parameters. Routes can accept dynamic values. All right, which are these parameters in here. So an example can be something like this. Again, you're probably familiar with like most of the things that I'm saying here, because this is just Laravel basics. All right, so if the request is simply API slash post slash 5, this will actually get a post, the post with the ID 5 in here, right? So then the ID in here, this ID, which is the parameter, actually equals 5 like that, which is passed to the controller. So we can perform the logic and grab the post by this ID. All right, we also have another concept, which is the route model binding, which a lot of it can automatically convert route parameters into models. An example can be something like this. Route gets slash post like that. So we can also send the model itself. We can inject it right inside the route in here, and also inside the method inside the controller. All right, so instead of sending the slash, instead of simply sending, or instead of injecting the ID right inside the method show, we can just inject the model itself, which in this case is going to be something like post model. All right, a lot of it will automatically fetch the post from the database using the ID. So we're going to inject the post model inside the method show, but Laravel will actually grab the ID from it. All right, this is the magic of route model binding if you're not familiar with it, but I think you are. All right, we also have the route groups. Routes can be grouped to apply shared behavior. An example can be something like this. Right, we will go in here for route, and then middleware, and then this is our middleware, which is again the middleware that's related to Syncatium. All right, and here we simply have group, and inside the group we can call a callback function, which will simply allow us to have like a lot of other routes in here, and all of these routes will simply follow the same middleware, or this middleware. It will be simply performed or enforced on all of the routes right in here. All right, so this is why a group is simply used like that. All right. So all routes inside the group simply will require authentication. So this in here is the authentication related to Syncatium. All right. So if a user tries to actually access the slash profile route, he should be authorized or sorry, authenticated. Otherwise, he will not be allowed to access those. All right. So ABI resource routes in here, which is another point. Laravel provides resource routes to create CRUD endpoints automatically. So this is a magic inside Laravel itself. An example can be something like this. We can write something like this: route EBI resource posts, and then post controller class like this. All right, so this single line will generate index, store, show, update, and destroy, which will follow the REST standards. Uh, writing something like this, only this one line will generate 5 routes, all right, which simply will contain those actions, all right, or those methods. All right, we're going to take a look at this in the next couple of videos. All right, just know that there's something like this that we can do, which is ABI resource routes, all right, which is highly used or intensively used when building applications, because only with this one line you can have a lot of routes. All right. Uh, we also have the route listing. You can view all registered routes using the PHP artisan route list. Right, so this will help. Of course, this is like a basic artisan command that I would say 100% know. So this helps verify endpoints, HTTP methods, controllers, and middlewares, and we will use that actually later to show you that once we use this one line, the API resource line, we will have a lot of other routes. All right, 5 routes. All right, a summary in here to finish this up. The routes define how requests are handled. All right, and ABI routes live in the route slash ABI.php. Each route connects to an endpoint to a controller method, and HTTP methods define the ABI action. And the resource route simply uh, resource routes simplify CRUD APIs. Routing is the entry point for every REST API request in Laravel. Actually, the route is like it's one of the steps when we do a request to our Laravel applications. All right, it's one of the main entry point. It's one of them. It's one of the most important steps when working with Laravel. When working with Laravel request lifecycle. All right, when it comes to Laravel request life cycle. All right. So yeah, this is basically it, and I will see you in the next one.